So it's been 9 years since the Fukushima meltdown. What have we learned? Kevin Kamps tells us all about it. Check it out. Leave your comments, ding the bell, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. Anyhow, on the line with us right now is Kevin Kamps. He's the radioactive waste specialist at beyondnuclear.org. You can also tweet him at beyondnuclear. Kevin, welcome back.
Hey, Tom. Good to be here. Thanks.
It's great to check in with you. It's been a while since we've talked. We need to do it more frequently. You were visiting the Fukushima Daiichi area, and you saw the nuclear power plants before the meltdown. And I understand there now is a connection to Fukushima and the Olympics coming up. Tell us about these two things.
Sure. I was in Japan in August of 2010, and I was in Fukushima on August 6th, which is Hiroshima Day. I was on a national speaking tour. This was 7 months before the catastrophe began. So all of the people I met there, and I was there on an anti-nuclear, speaking tour, so a lot of these folks were skeptical of the nuclear plant that they live next door to. And all of them, probably 100 people all told, including the mayor of one host town, the vice mayor of another, are now and have been for 9 years to this day nuclear evacuees with no prospect of returning home. There are still 40,000 nuclear evacuees, and many more who should not have returned home, but they have been forced to by the Japanese government. And it's a part of this propaganda campaign by the Abe administration to say everything's normal, everything's fine, nothing to see here, right down to the Olympic torch relay is going to begin at J City, a soccer complex very near Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. And Greenpeace just yesterday put out a report that said, hold on a second here, we're finding hotspots all over the place here.
Wow.
So it's really nuts.
So this is the anniversary, the 9th anniversary of the Fukushima disaster. If you could quickly recap exactly what happened and then bring us up to date on whether this disaster area, these crippled reactors, are still dumping radioactive waste into our environment.
Yeah, a 9.0 earthquake, a 45-foot-tall tsunami that caused the meltdown of 3 atomic reactors at Fukushima Daiichi and large-scale releases of hazardous radioactivity into the environment. And yes, it does continue. There is a slow hemorrhage of radioactivity into the ocean on every single day. But more significantly, perhaps, is 1.2 million tons of highly radioactive wastewater that the Japanese government and Tokyo Electric want to dump into the ocean intentionally because they're tired of storing it. So this is all going on as 40,000 plus Olympians and perhaps millions of spectators from all over the world are about to descend on Metro Tokyo and even Fukushima itself. Fukushima City would host the baseball and softball events despite these hotspots that are all over the place.
Wasn't Fukushima City evacuated?
No, it never was, but that's the thing is even cities that were evacuated closer to Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant, the Japanese government, by cutting off any stipends that people were depending on, have been forced to return to their old homes despite the radioactive contamination. And a point of the Greenpeace report is they've had major typhoons like late last year that caused recontamination of decontaminated household areas. It comes down off the forested mountains, which is 70% of the Fukushima landscape, and recontaminates people's homes.
Wow. Has there been any analysis of the public health consequences of this? I mean, are they seeing, like, after the war in Iraq, or the initial stages of the war in Iraq, we started seeing basically an epidemic of birth defects among Iraqi children, and in some cases it was alleged American soldiers' children as a result of exposure to depleted uranium, which is mildly radioactive, and uranium itself is a toxic element. Have there been anything like that, any kind of research on that? And if so, has the Japanese government let that out?
Well, big picture, the Japanese government and the academic nuclear medical complex is trying to downplay the problems as much as they can get away with. But there are alarming findings having to do with childhood thyroid pathology, which would be the radioactive iodine-131 from the radioactive releases. Workers, for sure, there have been documented cases of leukemia, for example, among cleanup workers, So they're trying not to do the studies as they often do, but one voice from University of Tokyo said, hey, if we dump all this wastewater in the ocean, we can't track where it goes. We won't know the health impacts. And sure enough, bioaccumulation in the seafood supply would harm not just the Japanese population, but any population eating Pacific seafood. But they don't do the health studies. They don't want to know.
So explain how bioaccumulation works and why we on the west coast of America might be concerned if we're just fishing locally, essentially, or buying, fish that are taken out of the U.S. coastal Pacific.
Well, the pro-nuclear Japanese government and Tokyo Electric would have you believe that dilution is the solution to radioactive pollution. Mm-hmm. The part they don't mention is that the food chain reconcentrates the radioactive pollution, and human beings are on the top of that food chain. So you could be exposed to tritium or radioactive cesium in your seafood, and there's very little to no monitoring, at least in certain countries, including the United States. There's very little monitoring of how bad the contamination is in the seafood supply. So they're treating it like the accident hadn't happened.
Yeah, so my understanding of how this would work is, the radioactive material gets into the ocean at an atomic or molecular level. It's absorbed by plant life in the ocean and small bottom-feeding animal life and krill and things like that. That gets eaten by small fish. The small fish get eaten by larger fish. The larger fish get eaten by bigger fish still. And by the time you get up to something like a 1,000-pound tuna, it has really reconcentrated, to use your description. Am I accurately characterizing this?
You're right. And something like radioactive cesium concentrates in muscle tissue. So that's, where it goes in the fish, in their flesh, right. And then that's what humans eat.
And do some of those fish,
our muscle.
And do some of those fish migrate from as far away as Japan to the west coast of the United States?
Incredibly enough, bluefin tuna gestating off the coast of Fukushima swam across the ocean, and by August of 2011, there was radioactive tuna swimming and living on the west coast of North America. That's how quickly it came here.
Wow. Wow. So just to wrap this up, we're talking with Kevin Kamps, the radioactive waste specialist at beyondnuclear.org. What can we in America do who are alarmed by this? And of course, this raises the issue of to what extent are American nuclear plants similar in design and function to Fukushima?
We have about 30 identical or very closely related General Electric Mark I and Mark II boiling water reactors in the United States. So an effective thing for Americans to do is contact your U.S. representative and both your U.S. senators and urge them to do everything in their power to shut down these Fukushima twin designs before the worst happens here in the United States. But larger picture, shut down all atomic reactors. They all have their pathways to meltdown. The high-level radioactive waste storage pools have their pathways to fire. We need to shut it down.